How many people can actually use a programming language? Right, that's good. How many people have actually ever used Perl at all? Okay. Okay, right. You're not really going to probably learn a great deal about Perl. For the people who've never used programming languages, the talk's really to help you understand all the resources that make using Perl easy, which is necessarily the code itself. So it's very much on the culture, and you can get lots of really good help, which will make a big difference to what you write. So which button do we press? There we go. Brief history of Perl. It's very old in computing terms. Version 5 is the one that everybody uses these days. If a book actually says Perl 5, it's antique, because when people say Perl now, you assume version 5. It's being released. The current version 5.8.8 is new versions, patch versions that come out about every 6 months at the moment. It's quite active. There's a new improved version 5.10 which is being developed as well in parallel, and a whole new complete rewrite from scratch, which is Perl 6, which has been going on forever and will probably arrive the same day that Duke Nukem Forever and Windows Vista turn up. So that's give you an idea. It's well-established language, but it's still undergoing active development today. Okay. Perl isn't an idealistic academic language invented by a bunch of people at university. It wasn't invented by an engineering committee at a large company. It was basically written by someone who was a Unix system administrator for NASA. He was actually a linguist by training, not a computer scientist. And he said, well, I'll have a bit of that, and I'll have a bit of that, and I'll have a bit of that, and we'll make it look like that, but we'll use this. So he took what he thought was good from other programming languages and scrunched them together to create a programming language that was useful for someone who wasn't an academic and wasn't an industrialist. He was a system administrator who wanted to get things done. It mostly takes text processing languages, sed and awk, so it's very good at taking lists of things and acting on that list of things. It's very good at processing text. It uses simple shell structure, so it's very good at accessing all the standard commands that are available on a Linux or a Unix system. They're just built in, they're available to you. It's wrapped up to look a bit like C, because most people use C as a standard programming language, but in reality it's not actually that C-like at all, and it's actually very Lisp-like, but it doesn't look anything like Lisp, because people find Lisp scary. It's an academic language, so it's made to look like C, but in reality, conceptually underneath, there's a lot of things are actually very Lisp-like if you actually peel away the thin veneer of C on top. Okay. A lot of people get wound up about whether it's compiled or interpreted. Perl, you write Perl as text files, you pass it to the Perl program. It actually takes it and converts it into a syntax tree which is optimized. You can write two pieces of Perl code and they'll actually generate the same tree, because it'll optimize them away for you. So some things you do one way and when someone does a different way will actually end up as identical code. And once it's got its optimized syntax tree, it just runs through that. So Perl is like Java. It's compiled and interpreted at the same time. It's not like C and it's not like BASIC. It's a bit of both. There are efforts afoot to separate this so you can do the compilation, build a tree and store it and then run it again, but the benefit's very marginal and most people just forget about it. The only time that makes a difference is if you're running a website, because the web server has to compile the same program many times, so in that situation you want to actually have it stored in memory, which I'll mention later on. But it's very similar to Java in many respects, although all the terms are different. But in practice it's actually very similar. Okay. There is a long sentence which explains about Perl's culture, but the main thing is, the underlying idea is hard tasks are easy and seriously non-trivial tasks possible. It's actually designed to do some pretty impossible things. I know someone who has written a Perl program which controls an alarm clock on his bed and adjusts the time that he needs to get up based on the running time of the trains that he uses to get to work. And if Connect South Central cancel enough trains, it will simply send an email to his boss to tell him he's working from home instead and wake him up at 9 o'clock. Right? It seems incredibly insanely impossible to do, but it actually, when you actually look at the code he wrote, it's trivial. So Perl is designed to do some very, very bizarre things and make them actually, from a programmer's perspective, easy. It does trade off lots and lots of things against that, but from you as the user's perspective, it comes across quite easy. So the first thing is Perl is really designed to make life easy for the programmer. This means it will burn through enormous amounts of CPU, gigantic amounts of memory. It might run incredibly slowly, but it will do something in 3 lines of code that might take an enormous chunk of C or a gigantic amount of Java, because it's your time that it's interested in, not computer's time. Variables, you need a variable, they just appear when you want them. Some languages you have to declare the variable, tell them what kind of variable type it is, say how much memory you want to use them, and when you've finished using the variable you've got to deallocate it. Perl, don't worry. You want a variable, it appears. You've finished using it, it disappears. Perl takes care of that. Typing, you don't need to bother saying this is an integer or a string. Perl, they're all the same as far as Perl can say. You need to convert something from one type of variable to another, it'll do it automatically, reasonably well, and probably get the right answer. Not 100%. Automatic memory management, hashes, if you've never come across hashes, they're great. In programming languages, most people are familiar with arrays. You have an array and it's got a slot number 1 with a value of 3, a slot number 2 with a value of 4. In Perl you can have slot number 1, it isn't a slot called 1, it's actually called dog, and the value of dog is bark. Slot number 2 isn't number 2, it's cat, and cats go meow. And number 3 is obviously a mouse goes squeak. And you can just add new ones at the bottom. So you can have elephants and then go whatever elephants do. Hashes are very good for a lot of things that you deal with as a human being and you might want to work with. You have USB keys and a hard disk. So if you're writing a program, you can actually describe them by a human readable name. The hash algorithm in Perl is incredibly efficient. It can store gigabytes of data in a human readable structure. You can store the entire content of a database and turn it into a simple thing that you can manipulate in a programming language in a meaningful way. It'll use lots of memory and it might run very slowly, but it's incredibly powerful at that kind of human approach to complex data. A lot of the DNA manipulation work's written in Perl, and they have very, 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 very big computers with very, very, very large data structures that you can't actually imagine. Here it says procedural and object oriented. If you're a single person working on a single piece of code and you just want to make, I need to connect to that website and extract a piece of information so I can type one command and it'll show me the stock price of something on the command line. It's only you working on it, you write a simple bit of code, you don't need a complex object oriented interface. If you're part of a team of 50 developers working on a massive project, you can't just write code in that standard procedural way, you do it in object-oriented. So programming languages like Java, Ruby, very object-oriented. Perl, you can use both at the same time. Whatever use fits you. Small-scale project, one little command line you just want to run once, don't worry with object orientation, just do it. Large project that other people are going to have to maintain, you can make it object-oriented. And the final thing is, compared with things like C and Java, Perl has everything, including the kitchen sink, built in. It's amazing. It's got a regular expression engine built in, probably one of the best there is. It's just there. You need to know what the time is. It's got time modules built in. You need to know access to all sorts of the standard C components of a Unix system. They're just built directly into Perl. There are so many convenience features built in, it's quite scary. Especially when I get to the next point, which is the things that aren't built in which are available. That is Perl program. No fancy stuff at the top necessarily. You don't have to declare a beginning or any complicated structure. You say print hello world. Actually, you don't even need the semicolon at the end in this particular case. It will run. It's perfectly valid. It's not very exciting, but that will work, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's a bit more useful. You have a standard shebang so that the shell knows where to find the Perl interpreter and run it automatically. So if you made it executable, it will run without you having to type Perl, my program. You just type my program. Strict turns that nice authentication off. You can't now just have variables appearing willy-nilly when you want them. You have to declare them, you see. My variable. Big projects, it stops you making typos, it makes life easy in debugging. Small projects, you don't worry about it. Warnings is the same, you add more, it will check this, it will verify that for you. Big projects, it's just sort of essential. Small projects, you just skip it. So here we have, my greeting is this. My now says we're going to create a variable. Perl uses symbols to tell the variables apart. Some people like them, some people don't. It's very personal. I think they're great because I've used Perl for a long time, and I look at other programming languages and say, how can I possibly tell what's programming language and what's variables? It's personal choice. Perl uses them in a slightly strange way, but I won't mention that, but it does. You simply say, hello world, it's put into that greeting. When you say print greeting, the contents of that will come out. Exit. That's the entire sum of all the code I'm going to show you, because the more important thing is what comes next. Okay? There is lots and lots of resources for Perl available. If you are someone who wants to use a bit of Perl, these are just a snapshot. I think O'Reilly have over 30 books on Perl. There are lots of other publishers churning them out. I happen to have one here, and they even gave me a t-shirt. So, starting from a learning Perl, which will start from someone who knows some programming language. You've got an intermediate, object-oriented, and a very advanced one for doing some really strange and scary things. This is the definitive reference book. It's basically 1,200 pages of the man page dumped out and print and hand bound. It is the man page essentially. This is very recent book, very popular for large projects. There's an awful lot of ways of doing things in Perl, all these built-ins, all these different styles, and you can do very stupid things very spectacularly and efficiently. That suggests that if you want to do certain things, there are ways that are more efficient. You don't have to go and invent them. You don't have to follow Perl best practices, but it's a suggestion. So what else have we got? Right. This is possibly one of the best things that Perl has to offer, which is Comprehensive Perl Archive Network, CPAN. Perl has a lot built in, but it didn't have everything. So people started putting their little pieces of reusable code on an FTP server, and then some bright spark organized it. There are currently over 10,000 reusable pieces of code available. The whole system has got a complex way of managing it and organizing it. It's very helpful, and there are more things on there than you can possibly imagine. If you're building web pages or processing web pages, the CGI library is the definitive way of extracting data from someone processing a form. If you want to talk to database from a Perl programming perspective, we don't care whether you're running DB2, MySQL or SQLite, because from Perl's perspective they're all the same. We have drivers for all of them. You don't need to worry about them as a programmer. You simply say, I want to create a database connection, the database type is so and so, and that's your connection. As long as you don't put some kind of strange SQL that the database doesn't understand, it doesn't care. So Perl programs will happily scale from the smallest, tiniest little database right the way up to the biggest enterprise database you can imagine. And from you as a programmer's perspective, you don't have to change anything. It's got lots and lots of interfaces to all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I put SAP here. SAP, if you don't know, is a very expensive piece of German software for running your business. It does all the enterprise resource planning. It's very expensive, very proprietary, but it has a Perl interface, which means you can do everything you can possibly imagine in SAP from Perl, from a Perl native perspective. It's brilliant. It's actually fantastic. And there are lots and lots of other things like that where people have a large proprietary application and there's a little Perl interface. You'll be amazed what you can connect Perl to. It's quite scary. If you want to manipulate your music archives, it can read MP3s, it can read OGs, it can extract the ID tags. Someone has done it already. It's got an enormous plethora of time and date modules. It will even work out whether that's an American date or a British date. Probably, except for the dates which are completely unknown that you can't tell apart. But it will have a good guess. There's a mountain of templating engines. One guy designed a templating engine because he wanted to make kites. It's one of the default definitive ones, Template Toolkit 2. He was making kites and he used a templating engine for making the layout of the framework and the fabric. And there is so much stuff on there, it is unimaginable. A lot of it is rubbish, I will admit. 10,000 modules contributed by lots of people all over the world. A lot of that is dross. It doesn't work. It's not documented properly. But there are certainly over 1,000 very well written, very well documented modules that will do an awful lot of things for you, so you have to write surprisingly little code. Okay. CPAN, well, it's a global system of mirrors scattered all over the world. There is an upload server called Pause. There is a request tracker. Every Perl module on that system, you can click onto it and you can actually see all the bugs listed by it by third parties. There are two search engines, Search and the Kobe Search. Most people use the Search, but the Kobe Search has got some really nice tools. If you're a Windows user, it'll actually generate the appropriate Windows file for you, so you can install Perl programs directly from the web. Okay. The main modules that people use, if you're building web pages, CGI is the one almost everyone uses. It's very well written, very well maintained, very, very carefully examined. Extracting data from a form on a web page and getting it wrong can really seriously screw your organization. You can make very big holes in your organization. CGI is written by a geneticist who was doing some form processing on a web page, and it has become the de facto standard. The DBI is the database interface. It's again a standard. Prior to the DBI, every database had its own custom interface. Now you just simply load the DBI, tell it to use this driver for the device, and you never need to know anything else about the database at all. Template Toolkit has become a very, very standardized templating engine. All three of those have books published dedicated just to them because they are so popular. In fact, the first one I think has more than one. CPAN itself, there is a module built into Perl which allows you to access CPAN and load all the bits very much the way that apt will manage all the packages on a Debian system. It will work out the dependencies and say, oh, you need to load this one before you can load the one you're interested in. You can use it as an interactive tool, or you can simply just run it from the command line and it will just work everything out. It will do all the tests, put the manual pages in the right page, install it, configure it, everything. Apache Mod Perl. If you're running a large commerce site, Apache Mod Perl will load Perl into Apache and take those trees that you've loaded and store them in memory. This will change your performance from managing 10 dynamically generated web pages a second, because it's actually quite hard to generate a web page, to over 100 per second, and that makes a significant difference if you're a large organization. I think Ticketmaster in the US is one of the classic examples of people who use Mod Perl, and they actually, I think, sponsor CPAN amongst other things. You can do an awful lot with Mod Perl, and who's the other one? One of the advertisers that everybody hates, DoubleClick. Their entire infrastructure runs on Mod Perl. It wouldn't be possible without having Perl embedded into Apache for their organization to work. They couldn't serve that many that many pieces of cookies and whatever it is to track what you're buying, where you're going, and everything imaginable. I threw find file rule on because it's a fun one. You can find files on your system very easily with that one. It's very, very powerful way of finding files and then generating a list and then processing them. So if you have some files, some graphic files, some MP3s, you can write clever rules that says, find me all the OGG files that are 3 months old in this directory and give me a list. And it's quite powerful, very friendly. People have problems finding files. I believe that several file find commands on several Linux systems are actually just wrappers around that. That's actually what you're using when you type find on several systems. Not everyone, but quite a few. And then this one here, LWP and Mechanize, you've seen that in the last talk because that's how the screen scraping was done. Mechanize allows you to interact with a web page like a person, sort of. So you write a script that says, go to the web page and fill an entry into this box, and then put an entry into that box, and then press the submit button, then remember the cookie, and on the next page put this entry into that box and this entry into that box, and then give me the result. That's how the chappie extracted the data from the train running times for his alarm clock. Because there's no semantic web available for train running sites, he had to screen scrape it.
I'm also thinking blog spam and wiki spam.
Yes, unfortunately. Mechanize is built on top of LWP, and you can automate just about anything. And I suspect an awful lot of the spam comes from that tool. This is true, unfortunately. A lot of spammers do use Perl because it's quite good for what they do. Must confess. So what have we got? Some useful resources. Now what have we got here? Nice training company in Australia. They give all their training manuals away as PDF. So you just go to the website and download them. He's actually a nice chap, and he has got a nice blog on one of the sites I'll mention somewhere, and you can read what he's up to. He's also into diving. But they have nice manuals. They're available. They're free. Ovid, who's just moving from Portland to Nottingham, he's on the committee of the Perl Foundation. He has a CGI course. If you want to make web pages, CGI is something you really don't want to get wrong, because someone can take over your machine. And he has a very simple course of how to do it. It's freely available. There's the Learn Perl website, which links to books and tutorials. The entire documentation of Perl is available on your machine when you have it anyway, but there's also an online copy just for belt and braces. And then there's Randall, very interesting chap, one of the most famous felons in the Perl community. But he has an excellent list of Perl columns dealing with all sorts of topics, written in I think 4 different journals over the last 5 or 6 years. All of them are available from his website, and if you need someone to come and train your organisation to use Perl, his firm does do most of the banks, even though he was convicted for hacking into Intel's computers to prove that they weren't properly secured, but that's another long story. So there's also an awful lot of community sites. You can usually ask someone in the Perl community how to do something and you'll get an answer. Perl Monks is great. Like CPAN, it's got lots of people on it, and there's lots of rubbish on there, but there are lots of very sensible questions. How do I get a list of files in a directory that are over a certain age? And there's lots of examples of, you can do it this way, and that way, and another way, but you will get answers. Use Perl is a good place if you're interested in news and journals. The Perl Foundation sort of links everything that is Perl together. There are grants available if you want to do something esoteric. There are conferences. There's O'Reilly run conferences in the US, part of OSCON, and there are grassroots ones run in Europe, North America and Australia. And they're very cheap. I went to the Paris one just because I have relatives living in Paris, so it was easy. Very friendly. You meet lots and lots of people. And then there are Perl mongers. These are organisations just like Lugs. The biggest one in the world is the London Perl Mongers Association. Very active, very busy mailing list. They're very interested in all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Should you serve hot pims in winter, I think was one very long-running discussion in December. But there are lots of people. They have technical meetings, social meetings. So Perl is a language where you can find people who will help you. They're a very, very friendly bunch of people. Okay. Just so that they're in the slide, I actually included all the links here. Where are we? This is an interesting one. When you load a module through PAWS up to CPAN, a whole bunch of people will test it for you automatically. On all sorts of systems, you'll get reports that it doesn't work on a VAX, or it doesn't work on Windows 95 because you've done something specifically Unixy or something like that, or it only works on a Windows machine. There is, as you can see, an awful lot of Perl.org sites. The community is quite strong and quite coherent, and it used to have a reputation for being a bit go away and read the manual, but particularly in Perl Monks, that is very, very much frowned on. Read the friendly manual is not an acceptable answer anymore, and you will get stomped on for suggesting it. Very hard. Okay, so if I can switch over to here, so rather than stop, I'll just show you some examples what you can find in Perl. And So I'll look for here for XML, RSS tools. So I'm interested in something that's to do with XML, I'm interested in RSS, and I'm interested in tools, sort of hierarchically. It's not forced, but it's convenient. And I happen to know there's something there because I wrote it. This is me. So if you click on here, you get a nice bit of documentation. The documentation is actually written in the code. This is actually in the Perl, and it's been extracted out from it. It's all built in. So here's some more code. You don't have to look at this. As I promised, there wouldn't be any more code. So now if you go here, you got all sorts of things. You can see what the CPAN testers found when they looked at this code. You can click onto a discussion forum, which I suspect there's no one's discussed this because it's mine and I'm a nobody. There are no reported bugs. If you wanted to diff this version against the previous version, you can actually use the tools. They've extracted from my file that this is released under GPL. So the changes file, the meta file, and there are a whole bunch of articles. I happen to know that this one is fairly complete because I actually wrote it to the specification. Some of them will quite happily have no readme and they'll be missing a license and you have no idea how to use it. But a good example will be well documented. So if we pick something at random, can we have a suggestion for a topic that someone may be interested in automating with Perl?
Well, given that we've had RDF today, are there any RDF processing tools?
Let's have a look. I know there are, I just don't know how many. 196 links found. Some of them might not be that great, but anyway, remember Redland? Open Guides. Oh, I know what Open Guides are. Open Guides are built on a very sophisticated wiki. So there you are. There's your wiki with an RDF interface, or a plugin to the Open Guides tool. RDF Simple. Simple is, there are no rules in Perls, but people tend to stick to certain behaviors. Simple is usually being created by someone who found the original module too complex. So then someone invents a simple, which usually becomes the popular one. You'll find simple crops up. There'll be an XML simple and a web simple and a config simple. It's a very common pattern. So there you are. Yeah, we've even got YAML, yet another markup language. So if you want to convert your RDF into another markup language, there we are. There's lots. I couldn't speak of the quality of them or the usefulness. Some of them will be very, very good. Interact with Sesame RDF servers. So that's there. And we shall take a risk and that there's nothing rude going on in Perl Monks. Hit the button. Yes, right. Here we go. It's all quiet. Yes, that's good. What you have here is a very busy site supported by Perl. These are the people logged in at the moment. You have a whole sorts of sections. Perl poetry, if you're interested, you can write, because Perl was not created by a scientist or an engineer, it was actually created by a linguist. You can actually write poems in Perl that will actually compile and execute. They may not necessarily do anything useful, but you can. So there's a whole section here for poetry, and I suspect also for golf and obfuscation. Yes, Perl people actually are proud of the fact you can write Perl that is completely unintelligible to any other human being. I wouldn't recommend it for anything other than academic exercise. So you have all sorts of sections, and let's do a search. Super search. Oops, dyslexia has its problems. Go on, hold still. Now, let's have a think. What can we search for? What question might someone have asked? There we go. How to install modules. People often ask that when they're beginning. So you'll see all sorts of variations of how to install modules. Questions usually being asked. And And the art of getting started with the programming language is actually knowing that you can actually find the answers, which is why there's no code in this. This is all about the culture. You'll find answers here. You'll find some really rubbish ones too, but you'll generally find some pretty good ones. Right, that should probably be enough, but I want to show you one thing if I can remember the URL. If I can get it right. Google. Don't think I can guess probably can't guess the CV here. No. For the BBC Backstage project, they made a lot of their television running data available in RDF. And some nice chap made a very sophisticated website in about a month. Well, actually, I say a month. It was actually a few weekends, a few evenings each week, and that pulls all the television running data, and then pulls information from Internet Movie Database, and pulls correlations between different preferences, and it's all written with Ajax because Ajax is trendy. It took almost no effort at all. It's all written in Perl. So you can do very, very sophisticated things very, very easily, and from a Linux administrator's perspective, you can do simple repetitive things very, very, very easily that you might want to do. I munged a whole bunch of TrueType fonts. You know, you can download free TrueType fonts off the internet. They all have stupid names, and most of them are rubbish, but I just wanted to give them the file name that was meaningful. Well, there's a module for TrueType fonts which will go into the TrueType font, extract the name, and then you can copy the file from where it is to where you want it to be, but with a human readable name. Easy to do. You know, so that's what I'm sort of suggesting. It's a useful language to have, but it's important to understand the culture if you're a beginner, because the culture will actually get you going very, very quickly. I could have spent half an hour showing you code, but frankly on a Saturday afternoon most people can't be bothered to remember it. That's why there wasn't much code. So I think that's the end. And in case we didn't have network connection, I just have a couple of static screenshots. Or Perl.com. Yes, in reference to the camel, it's a trademark of O'Reilly. And this is Amelia. She does have a name. The guy who translated the book into French decided she's called Amelia. It's not a he. And that's the London Perlmongers, who are obsessed with orange. But that's another story. And Buffy. Yes, but we won't go there. So there we are. It's a friendly language, but if you're starting, the culture will get you there faster than just sitting down and trying to slug your way through.